Mike Ditka was tough. Even feared linebacker Reinvention wasn't spared from his clobberings. Ditka's teammate said he put the fear of God into defenders. Watching these highlights, I'm starting to see why. Be that delivering big hits, playing through injuries, or berating his own teammates, the dude embodied old school football. Not only that, he helped transform the tight end position. Before him, they were primarily blockers who'd catch the occasional pass, but he would become a pass catcher first, and so it's fitting he became the first tight end inducted into the Hall of Fame. The coach was also the tight end once upon a time, and while he is rightly remembered for his achievements as a head coach, at least with the Bears, let's forget those years with the Saints, today we're going to take a look at his impressive career as a tight end in the NFL. By the way, if you're new here, welcome. This is NFL Unveiled, and if you like old school football, you're in the right place, because that's all we talk about. Ditka played at the University of Pittsburgh, and while he led the team in receiving for 3 consecutive years, tight end was a different position back then. Coming out of college, he was scouted as a linebacker instead of a tight end. Although Ditka never planned to play in the NFL, he actually went to university to become a dentist, he was pretty good. So the Bears drafted him 5th overall in 1961, and they had different plans to most scouting him. As I said, tight ends were primarily blockers, but the Bears would transform him into a weapon. In his first season, he finished with over 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns. Both of these were still rookie records for a tight end up until recently. Brock Bowers has surpassed his receiving yard record, but Ditka averaged just over 19 yards a reception, whereas Bowers was just over 10 yards a reception. So Ditka got the same amount of yards with almost half the receptions. Such an excellent season earned him Rookie of the Year. And aside from tight ends, his 12 receiving touchdowns is tied 5th all-time for rookies at any position. The only 4 who rank above him, Randy Moss, Jamar Chase, John Jefferson, and Billy Houghton, all of whom are receivers. To put how innovative Ditka was into perspective, AP did not even have a spot for tight end for their All-Pro ballot in 1961. However, the NEA did have a slot for him, making Ditka the first All-Pro tight end in NFL history. Saying this, he'd finished his career with 6 All-Pro selections, so they did make a spot for him eventually. While his rookie season would be best for yards and touchdowns, he'd continue to dominate. In 1962, he led the team in yards with 904 and touchdowns with 5. The following year, he led the Bears in catches with 59 for 794 yards and 8 touchdowns. His best play that season would come 2 days after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The Bears sat atop the NFL West at 9-1, but the Packers were on their heels. Down 17-14 with 5 minutes left, the Bears faced 2nd and 36. Ditka was supposed to run a corner route, but asked to run a hook route instead. He was out of gas, and he thought the Bears didn't need to get all 36 yards in one play. But they did. A magical, tough 63-yard run ended with Ditka out on the floor, gasping for air. The Bears would kick a field goal a few plays later and finish the game tied 17-17. Without that play, they could have very well lost and thus missed the playoffs. 1 month later, they won the NFL championship 14-10 against the Giants. In 1964, he finished with 75 receptions, a record for tight ends which stood till 1980 and after the introduction of a 16-game season. And when he retired, he ranked 2nd amongst all tight ends in receptions. Don't get it twisted though, he was still a great run blocker. Oh, and fan blocker. This is from a game where he swiftly takes out someone who ran onto the field. That guy was probably recovering in the hospital for a few days. What stands out more than his playing abilities was his toughness, both in playstyle and words. He was a perfect fit for that tough, old school vibe of Chicago. He challenged his teammates for their effort levels, he worked his ass off. I mean, a teammate said after joining the Bears, every day of practice might as well have been a game day. That's the kind of intensity he brought. And to further emphasize this point, a player once said if you were near Ditka, you quote, had to expect forearms and fists. One of the most feared defenders ever, Reinvention, even got a taste of Ditka's fury. Ditka lived for the contact. He did play linebacker at college after all. In a former coach's words, all he wanted to do was hit, hit, hit. Nitschke once knocked Ditka out unconscious, and Ditka was not going to let that one go. He would get revenge when he knocked Nitschke out of a different game with a blindside block. That would not be the end of it though. Outside of some restaurant, a fight almost broke out between the two in Milwaukee once. Nitschke yelled, "I'm gonna get you," and Ditka replied, "If you're gonna get me, you better get me good." As long as these two were on the field, hits were being delivered. Ditka and Nitschke, now that's a real Packers-Bears rivalry.
When Iron Mike played, he was mean and nasty and a mean and nasty era. If they would come after his knees, he would go after their knees. If they hit him in the head, he hit them in the head.
A big part of this can be attributed to his upbringing. As the oldest of his siblings, he had to set the example. And when he didn't, in his own words, "I got my ass beat." That instilled a tough nature he'd carry with him for life. and Ditka did the best to play even if he was injured. In his final college game, he dislocated his shoulder, but he continued to play. Then, in 1964, he separated his shoulder in an exhibition game. It kept popping out, so he had to wear a harness to keep it in place. And he didn't miss a game the entire season, and he caught 75 passes. But Ditka's performance began to decline only 4 years into his career. In 1965, a foot injury would not be as easy to overcome, and along with the injuries, the fiery Ditka began to irk Halas. After refusing to sign a new contract, he played out his option in 1966. He said Halas tried to pay players with salaries of the 1940s and 1950s. He then accepted a $50,000 bonus to sign a 3-year contract with the AFL's Houston Oilers. But once the AFL-NFL merger was agreed, the contract was voided. That being said, Halas was not pleased. Ditka was instead traded to the Eagles, which he described as purgatory on earth. Despite the injuries in Chicago, he didn't actually miss a single game, but that wouldn't be the case in Philly, and production subsequently began to decline. From catching over 300 passes for 4,500 yards and 34 touchdowns, he only had 39 receptions for 385 yards and 4 touchdowns with the Eagles. He clashed with their head coach, and Ditka admits had a serious drinking problem. After 2 years with the Eagles, he was ready to quit. He wasn't getting much playing time, he was abusing his body with the amount of alcohol he was drinking, but in those dark moments, a savior would call. Tom Landry, Cowboys head coach, traded for him in 1969 and was willing to give him a shot. Ditka went on to reinvent himself. From as high as 245 pounds, he trained hard, dropped to about 220 for most of his time in Dallas, he became a team player, and he rallied those around him, although it almost ended before it even began. Prior to the start of his first season, Ditka and running back Walt Garrison got into a car accident after a night out. Ditka went through the windshield and broke his jaw, but he would still play, and even with his jaw wired shut, he was cussing players out. And even though nobody could make out the exact words, they got the message. While he only started 8 games in his first 3 years, he would catch the final touchdown of Super Bowl VI in a 24-3 Cowboys win. That would eventually make him the only coach in NFL history to also score a touchdown in the Super Bowl. In 1972, he'd start every game, and although he was now blocking more than catching, he proved he still had gas left in the tank. While his production had declined, Ditka had a profound ability to establish the right mindset, once described as the Cowboys' spiritual leader, and that's where he could add value beyond the numbers. He was fiery, passionate, and, angry.
See that? That's your IQ, buddy. 0.
How about turnover, son?
I'd rather talk to him.
It was effective, and it would show as he went on to have a successful coaching career with the Bears. After retiring in 1972, he transitioned to coaching first for the Cowboys, and then as Bears head coach after he made up with George Halas.
I've had 4 hip replacements. I probably need a shoulder done. I'm getting a little forgetful, but you know, it doesn't. It's part of the game.
And that's why he's Iron Mike.